Okay, you can hear me?
Yep,
All right, so what subject area did you teach?
psychology,
At which university?
Acadia University,
And where is that?
Wolfville, Nova Scotia.
And are you a Canadian native?
Um, like you mean born in Canada? Because I was thinking like First Nations. I wasn't sure what you meant.
You're a Canadian citizen?
Yeah,
And you did a PhD in psychology?
yeah, from McGill University. Yeah,
So that's Montreal?
yeah.
And how did Montreal treat you?
I quite enjoyed it there.
And how would you describe your politics?
Uh, Hard to place me, I guess, because yeah, I don't think anyone can really categorize me. I think I managed to tick off people on both the left and the right. I just try to do what I think is the right thing to do, whatever is moral and just and fair. So I just try to do what I believe to be moral and fair, not worry about the label in terms of what category does it fit in under political ideologies.
What are some writers that you admire
Writers?
or thinkers?
Ooh, yeah, let me just think for a minute. Well, probably Thomas Sowell would definitely be one. Um, George Carlin for his wit. So there's definitely quite a range. It's hard to pick sort of, I guess, a favorite.
And some of the some journalists have described you as an anarchist. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, I don't know where anyone would have gotten that label from, because I am for sort of law and order as long as it's applied in a way that's fair and reasonable.
And on your Twitter, you had something along the lines of you were fired for exercising your free speech.
For academic freedom and dissent. So what had happened was when our president was a candidate for our university, I noticed that he said that he wanted to commit our university to a political ideology. So when he was referring to a social justice, and that created alarm bells in my mind. And so from there, I just slowly started with just a letter expressing my concern, and then when he became president, I held a panel discussion on free speech, which is on my YouTube channel. And yeah, so that's basically what no, that was a battle I basically chose where I was going to go full force and just completely commit to that position that the university's function is not to commit to political ideology, but be a place where all views can be discussed.
So this particular Canadian university has been taken over by social justice warriors.
Uh, yeah, I think so because what's unique to Canada over the states is here, majority of the universities are unionized workplaces,
Yeah,
and
so what
since
makes
now both,
how does
yeah, so now
that
both,
how
yeah, now we have
does
both the unions and the administrations being on the same page.
you have more continuity between the teachers union and the administration in Canada than we do here?
Yeah, there is partly that, and I don't know how the labor law works in the states, but here, um, the unions can do whatever they like, and there's no legal recourse. So there's one case right now, the teacher Miriam Mikhail. So she was fired for being sick, and she's trying to work her way to fighting her union by taking it and her employer to the Supreme Court. And right now, with the Supreme Court, they're saying, "Oh, we haven't had a chance to put a label on your case to give it a court file number." So she's really getting it. She's really getting it. Really being dragged through the system. She's been fighting for God knows how many years.
So what does she teach and why was she suspended?
She taught for the Catholic School Board in London, And so then, yeah, so she fell ill, and they didn't want to keep her, so they dismissed her without cause. And yeah, so there was collusion between the union and her employer, and she refused to sign any confidentiality agreement, and so it's just been taking it, through the various courts. And now her employer is trying to say she's a vexatious litigant, which is a term that you'd use if it was one person trying to sue everyone under the sun, which is something you generally don't want. But here, all she's doing is working against one, her employer and union over the various layers of the legal system.
So, what sickness did she have?
I didn't ask her that question because I figure that's a medical privacy issue.
But she unable to work? She's kind of laid up at home.
Well, I haven't talked to her. Yeah, I've tried not to ask her about the questions that I think are more pertinent between her and her doctor. The, but yeah, the main issue though is that in with Canada is that the unions can sign on your behalf, and so that's something that she's trying to fight. That's something. The key thing is the only places where you can think of where someone else can sign a contract on your behalf would be, let's say, something like if I fell ill and I signed what do you call it, a power of attorney to give to a friend to take care of me, to manage my finances if I was, if I wasn't in good physical health, or if I wasn't mentally fit. So that would be one thing where it's with my consent. But when you join a union, they don't tell you that they're giving that kind of power to you in the event that there's a dispute between you and the employer.
So, what did the employer sign off on her behalf?
Well,
Or
well,
what did the union? The union had to sign something off on her behalf with the employer.
well, in my case, I'll explain. With mine is that with my case, my union signed an agreement with the employer that waived all of my procedural rights that I had in the collective agreement and allowed me to be fired for, on these, an example, a third party or they called an independent investigation when there's nothing in our collective agreement that says that can be used as a basis for dismissal or discipline.
In how many years have you been a?
Yes, they could change the rules of the game. Yeah. So basically, what happens is when I started the job at Acadia, I was told, if you follow everything that's in the collective agreement, this is, sort of your book of laws. Follow that to the letter, and you'll be fine. And that's what I did. And so then the union, they wanted to get rid of me as well. So then they signed an agreement with the employer that allowed this third party investigation be a basis for my dismissal.
In how many years were you a professor?
15.
And you've been at Acadia the whole 15?
Yeah, I was a professor at Acadia from 2003 to 2018.
And the dismissal occurred in 2018?
Yep, that was August 31st.
And you said that you have not received any paychecks or back pay?
Well, they kept me on pay until my case was resolved. So basically, in terms of the legal technicality, was what was supposed. Uh, so what the media was told was that I was dismissed. What actually happened was that it was a proposed dismissal that goes to an arbitrator to decide. But if I was to get any kind of severance pay or anything like that, I would have had to um, agree to not keep. Basically, what I ended up doing was deciding to. Basically, what they asked me to do when I met with them on April the 1st of 2019 was they offered me $100,000 a year for 3 years with medical benefits, and it would be as pensionable income. But the problem with that is that I'd have to agree to never talk about the university in a bad way ever again. So it meant that all of my whole fight would have been for nothing. So I just agreed for a 50 grand lump sum payment. That seemed like a good severance package. It's better than nothing. And then they said, oh, well, you breached the settlement by talking about it on Twitter, and so then they not only took away my severance pay, but then the arbitrator ruled that I was dismissed for cause, when the reason I signed the settlement was that the words for cause were removed. So they changed the rules of the game on it has yeah. So in terms of arbitration hearings and the rulings, they have absolutely nothing to do with truth.
Yeah, I can imagine that being very frustrating. So I'm looking at other Twitter posts that you made. I wanted to know why you thought CBC lacked integrity.
Well, I could give you an example. Then is with my case is when I was let go on August, or when they said propose a dismissal on August 31st. After that, I gave the letter from the president to the CBC. The letter that was used for the discipline meeting, that was the basis for the dismissal, as well as a signed copy of the agreement that that my union had signed that allowed for that meeting to occur in the first place. And what she chose to publish was the discipline letter, but for readers who aren't looking carefully, most of them will think that that was my dismissal letter. So it's a distinction though, because only the president has the authority to actually dismiss anyone, not the vice president academic. So the letter that was shared with the general public was the vice president academic's letter, not the president's letter, and that was saying, oh, this is the real reason why he was dismissed.
And I also want to ask, what is Trudeau trying to regulate on social media?
Well, what's happened is he's given the mainstream media $595 million as a financial bailout. So of course it's going to come with strings attached. So they basically become puppets for whatever he wants to say, his mouthpiece. And then there's the social media side. So just legislation that would force Twitter, all the other social media groups to crack down on whatever they deem to be misinformation or hate speech and things like that. So basically anything that's critical of the Trudeau administration or policies that fall under social justice then would be classified as hate speech, and people would be forced to take them down or have their accounts canceled, that kind of thing.
Does that undermine your constitution?
It could. I guess it would be a matter of people putting in a challenge to the Supreme Court of Canada. But the problem is that our Supreme Court of Canada is stacked with activist judges, so it makes it so that's an additional challenge. So if they're all people who leaned towards the left end of the political spectrum, they're not going to be aware of the issues pertaining to the other side, like due process.
Another one of your Twitter posts I wanted to ask you about was, how are the views of scientists as a group different from those of science organizers as a group?
Well, there's the organizations, and in some cases you may have to be a member and it's required. And so basically there's the organizations, and pretty much you have the executive, they'll talk about what their views are and say that and claim that they represent the views of all scientists. So that's a distinction then between an organization where you're hearing from the PR person in essence, versus talking to individual scientists and trying to have a sense of what their thoughts are on different issues.
What are your thoughts on Greta Thunberg?
Well, I feel bad for her in a sense, because she's an adolescent with mental health issues, and she's been thrust on the world stage. My guess is through pressure from her parents. She's not fully informed on the issues on which she's speaking, and then is getting, of course, a lot of flack for what she's saying.
How is she uninformed or misinformed?
Well, on the issue, like she doesn't know what she's talking about on when it comes to the issues. No, she's promoting, this doomsday scenario about, as if the world is ending when the data don't suggest that at all. So there's no cause for the climate alarmism. So we definitely want to be um, attended to environment. I think everyone wants to make sure that future generations are going to have clean air, fresh water, the ability to grow food, things like that. But to say that there's some climate crisis and we have to stop everything we're doing, uh, you know, is overkill.
Another question from your Twitter. Why do you think immigration to Ireland is disastrous?
I post that was a clip from Computing Forever, and that has to do with Ireland's own immigration policies. So it's the same all over the world in terms of where we're allowing in mass migration from countries that have different values than the citizens that are here. And if you fill up your country with people from other nations who don't have the same values as you, then that's a recipe for disaster. Especially those people are ones who are going to be reproducing far more than the people who are already in your country.
And my final question is, what advice would you have for a young graduate student? I'm becoming a social studies teacher. How can I lead a life well lived?
Are you talking about the graduate school process, or I'm trying to get a sort of a sense? Because
Well,
during the graduate school years, there it's all about having that sort of that work life balance and starting with there because those are the kind of habits that will help you to get a job because you'd need to make sure you have a resume so you can get a job in the first place. And if you're starting off getting good habits right from graduate school, then those are ones that you'd hopefully just continue once you have a job after graduate school.
I think my question is more along the lines of what can, a young person that's engaged with scholarship, what kinds of things can they do in their life so that later on they'll be very happy with their decisions and their career?
But well, I guess they should explore options because there's, of course, though everyone thinks of, I think, just the academic route, but try to look at what routes there are outside of academia. So just that the number of positions within academia are going to be limited. And right now, there does appear to be a groupthink mentality. It's almost like you need to pass the political litmus test to get a job in academia in the first place. So given those circumstances, unless you want to be limited in what you're allowed to think and say on the job, etc., your best bet is to try to find jobs outside of academia. So especially if you want to do teaching, try to find ways of getting into a private school system or setting up private schools might be a different way or something that's different from an alternative from what's out there right now because it's either the public school system or private schools, but many of the private schools are just not affordable uh, for many average everyday citizens. So that might be a place to go is think of, okay, if I want to be like you said, a social studies teacher, how can I be a teacher but be one who's not in the public school system, but have in a school system where that's actually affordable by, you know, let's say parents who are in inner schools in the inner cities, as an example, where they need the education but obviously can't afford it. So how do you find come up with something where you can get meaningful employment and then serve the needs of the people you want to serve?
And what types of projects or research do you hope to pursue now that you have more time?
Well, right now I just want to get my personal affairs in order. Need to work on my application to an online Yorkville University, which offers an online master's in counseling psychology. So the idea there is if I have the counseling skills, that's a way I think I could help people to help themselves. And I'm hoping that's a way I could then continue to work with young adults because that seemed to be my strength was being able to work with the university students. And typically most of them are in the young adult age. So just finding a different way where I can still cater to my strengths, but in a different capacity.
What are your thoughts on Dr. Jordan Peterson?
Um, well, he's obviously a very well respected, brilliant person. Definitely had an influence on me. I think his stance played a role in me starting to ask questions, and that's what took me on the path on the journey that I went on. So yeah, just because when he made his stance about Bill C-16, that started to get me thinking. Wait a minute, how come in my own department, how come our union president isn't saying anything? How come we're not talking about this in our psychology department meetings? So that started getting me thinking something is really not right here. And so then I started doing digging. That's what led to the talk that I have on my YouTube channel, my talk on free speech, which is titled "Free Speech in Universities: Threats and Opportunities." So yeah, and then a lot of what he had to say is, makes perfectly good sense in terms of just putting responsibility back on the table. And I did, and some of the information that he had cited was ones that I'd read and talked about in my introductory psychology course. So especially in let's say on the sections on intelligence, and how there's actually a much bigger role of genetics than what I thought when I'd last taught the course 10 years ago. And that even newborn infants, I think even at a 1 month of age, you can see brain differences in newborn babies. So obviously that can't be due to a patriarchy or socialization or anything like that. So yeah, in that sense, he did have a big influence.
And I just want to close up with an opportunity for you to plug some of the articles or books that you're most proud of.
Um, that I've done. Most of what I've done that I'm most proud of is from my teaching, actually. So that's because that's what I put a lot of time, work, and effort into. Uh, so so probably I guess the recordings that I have from the last year that I taught at Acadia are probably what I think are my best works. In terms of the research, I put a lot more effort, I think, than my peers into how I train my honor students. So the projects that they wrote, I thought were all really first-class projects. So I've really taken pride in their work. The last bit of work that I presented was at the Canadian Society for Brain Behavior and Cognitive Science, which was on bullshit detection. And so I presented some pilot work there, uh, uh, in which I'd asked students about the Prime Minister of Canada's famous line, "Because it's 2015," and asked people to state if they thought that was bullshit, yes or no, and then also try to get a proxy of their political affiliations. And the group that was least likely to think that that was bullshit actually were the leftist progressives. Most other people, roughly in the 8% range, saw that statement as being BS. So I used that as the last conference presentation I went to say that we need more political diversity within the academy, because the students obviously are much more politically diverse than the professoriate. So of course, if we don't have that political diversity, we can't meet the needs of our students who are coming in with a range of different views. If our professors just have a limited set of views.
How can the Academy support a wider range of views?
Well, I know there was one president of a university in the United States, and he was making active efforts to actually recruit conservative professors because he needed those viewpoints to challenge some of the mainstream views on campus. So if there is a will, there's the way.
Rick, I thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on,
Okay, my pleasure.
and we'll be in touch.
All right, Kate, take care.
All right, bye.